Stop asking questions, Maria. The way my daughter-in-law said it wasn't loud, it wasn't angry either, it was quiet, too quiet. And sometimes quiet words cut deeper than shouting. I remember exactly where I was standing when she said it, in my own kitchen. The smell of burnt toast still hung in the air because I had forgotten it in the toaster while watching her through the window. She had just come home, stepping out of her car slowly, looking around the street before walking toward the house. Not the way people walk when they're simply coming home, more like the way someone checks if they're being watched. I told myself I was imagining things. At 62, you start doing that sometimes, reading too much into small gestures, worrying about things that are probably nothing. But when she stepped inside and saw me at the sink, she froze for just half a second, just enough time for a mother to notice. Long morning? I asked gently. She gave me a tight smile. Yes, just errands, that word again. For the past 3 weeks, everything in her life seemed to be an errand. Errands that started early, errands that ended late, errands she never really explained. So I asked the question that had been sitting quietly in the back of my mind. What kind of errands? And that's when she said it. Stop asking questions, Maria. Not rude, not explosive, just final, like a door being closed. And in that moment, something inside me shifted, because I had lived long enough to recognize that tone. It was the tone people use when they are hiding something. Before all of that started, life in our house had been simple, not perfect, but simple. My son Hendrix bought the house 8 years ago after his father passed away. It was a modest 2-story place with pale blue siding and a porch that creaked softly in the summer heat. When he asked me to move in, I hesitated at first. No mother wants to feel like a burden, but Hendrix had insisted. You raised me alone for 20 years, he said one evening while we sat at the kitchen table. Let me take care of you now. His voice carried the same softness his father once had. I couldn't say no to that, so I moved in. At first, it was just the two of us. Quiet evenings, simple dinners, the kind of peaceful routine that only comes after a lifetime of working too hard. Then Hendrix met Maeve. I remember the first day he brought her home. She stood in the doorway holding a small bouquet of white daisies. For you, she said with a shy smile. Nobody had brought me flowers in years. She was 33 then, slim, soft-spoken, her dark hair always tied loosely at the back of her neck. There was something gentle about her, or at least that's what I believed. Hendrix fell in love quickly. 6 months later, they were married in a small ceremony at a lakeside chapel. Nothing extravagant, just family, a few friends, and the quiet sound of water moving against the shore. I remember thinking how lucky we all were, 3 people under one roof, 3 lives slowly weaving together, and for a while it truly felt like that. Maeve helped me in the kitchen. We shared recipes. Sometimes she would sit beside me in the evenings while Hendrix worked late and ask questions about my younger years. What was Hendrix like as a child? Did he always work this hard? She listened carefully, like those stories mattered, and maybe they did. But after about 2 years, small changes started appearing, not all at once. Little things. Maeve began keeping her phone closer than before. She started stepping outside when taking calls. Sometimes she'd lower her voice so much I could barely hear anything through the hallway. I tried not to think about it. Young couples have their privacy, I understood that. But then Hendrix started working longer hours. Construction projects across the city kept him away until late evening. Most nights it was just Maeve and me in the house. At first we kept our little routines, tea after dinner, a short walk around the block, but slowly those moments disappeared. She became distracted, distant. Some evenings she would sit at the dining table staring at her phone like she was waiting for something or someone. One night I remember asking casually, "Everything okay?" She smiled without looking up. "Just messages." That was all, just messages. But the way her fingers moved quickly across the screen, the way she turned the phone slightly away from me. Those were the small details that began whispering in my mind. Still, I kept quiet, because suspicion can poison a house faster than truth. Then 3 weeks ago, the errands started. At first, it was once or twice a week. Then almost every morning, she would leave early. Sometimes before Hendrix even woke up. And when she came back, she looked tense, like someone carrying invisible weight. One morning, I noticed something else. Her hands were shaking slightly while she poured coffee. "Cold outside?" I asked. "No," she replied quickly, too quickly. And that's when the questions inside me began growing louder. Not accusations, just questions. Where was she going every morning? Why did she seem so nervous? And why did she look relieved whenever Hendrix walked through the door in the evening? Relieved. Like someone who had successfully kept a secret for another day. For weeks I told myself it was none of my business. I repeated that sentence many times. None of my business. But family has a way of pulling you into its quiet storms whether you want it or not. Then came the morning of the burnt toast. The morning she told me to stop asking questions. And the moment I realized that whatever Maeve was hiding, it wasn't small. After Maeve told me to stop asking questions, the kitchen became strangely quiet. The toaster clicked again. The burnt bread popped up. Neither of us reached for it. She walked past me toward the stairs without another word, the soft fabric of her sweater brushing the doorway as she disappeared into the hallway. I stood there holding the edge of the sink, not angry, not offended. Just thinking, when you reach my age, you begin to understand something about people. The loud lies are easy to spot. But the quiet ones, those are the ones that live inside a house. They sit at the dinner table. They walk through the hallway at night. And they wait patiently for someone to notice. I threw the burnt toast away and made fresh coffee. Outside, the morning light had started spilling across the street. A delivery truck rolled slowly past the house, its engine humming like distant thunder. Normal sounds, normal life. Yet something about that morning felt different, like the air itself had shifted. Hendrix came downstairs about 20 minutes later. His hair was still damp from the shower and he was buttoning his work shirt as he stepped into the kitchen. "Morning, Mom, morning." He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter the way he always did, half awake but already thinking about work. Construction had been busy lately. A new apartment complex across town had him leaving before sunrise most days. "You see Maeve?" he asked. "She's upstairs." He nodded. Then he rubbed the back of his neck and sighed. "Feels like I've barely seen her lately." I watched him quietly. "Work keeping you both busy?" Something like that. He shrugged, but I noticed the tiredness around his eyes. Marriage changes people. Sometimes it deepens love. Sometimes it creates quiet distances no one talks about. I thought about telling him about the errands, about the strange behavior, but the words stopped before they reached my mouth, because suspicion without proof can break more things than it fixes. So instead I simply asked, "You two doing all right?" Hendrix looked up at me, surprised by the question. "Of course." He said it quickly, too quickly, then he took a long drink of coffee and changed the subject. "I'll be home late tonight, concrete deliveries delayed again." That was Hendrix, practical, focused. Always solving problems with his hands instead of his words. A few minutes later, Maeve came downstairs. Her face looked carefully calm. The kind of calm someone puts on like a jacket. "Morning," she said softly. Hendrix kissed her on the cheek. "Morning." For a moment they looked like the same couple I had watched marry by the lake years ago. Ordinary, comfortable. But when Hendrix stepped outside to start his truck, Maeve immediately picked up her phone. Her eyes moved across the screen quickly. Then she glanced toward the window. Watching his truck pull away, watching until it turned the corner. Only then did she breathe out slowly. I pretended not to notice. Instead, I rinsed a coffee mug at the sink. "Going out today?" I asked casually. She hesitated. Maybe later, maybe another soft answer. Another careful sentence. I nodded as if it meant nothing, but inside the questions continued growing. The house always felt larger after Hendrix left. Quiet walls, soft footsteps, the gentle ticking of the old clock above the living room fireplace. Maeve moved around the kitchen silently, cleaning things that didn't really need cleaning. Then she poured herself coffee and sat at the table. For several minutes she just stared into the cup, lost in thought. Finally she looked up. "Maria, did I sound rude earlier?" The question caught me off guard. "A little," I admitted gently. She looked embarrassed. "I didn't mean to." Her fingers traced the edge of the mug. "I've just had a lot on my mind." I studied her face carefully. There were faint shadows under her eyes. The kind people get when sleep becomes difficult. "Anything you want to talk about?" I asked. She shook her head quickly. "No, it's nothing serious." Nothing serious. Another quiet wall. I let the moment pass. Some people speak when they are ready, others hide until they can't anymore. Around 10 o'clock, Maeve grabbed her purse. "I'm going to run a few errands," she said. Of course she was. "Drive safe," I replied. She gave me a quick smile and left. I waited by the window, not intentionally, just standing there with a dish towel in my hands. Her car pulled out of the driveway slowly. Then, instead of turning toward the grocery store like usual, she drove the opposite direction, toward the highway. I stood there for a long moment, watching the empty street. And that was the first time I allowed a darker thought into my mind. Where exactly was she going? The next few days followed the same pattern. Maeve left. Maeve returned. Maeve said very little, but one detail began to bother me more than anything else. The way she checked the mailbox, every afternoon, even when the mail had already come, she would open the small metal door slowly and look inside like she was expecting something important, then close it again. Empty. I noticed it on Tuesday, then again on Wednesday. And by Thursday I was certain of it. She was waiting for something that hadn't arrived yet. Friday morning brought rain, the kind of steady gray rain that makes the whole neighborhood feel sleepy. Maeve left again around 9. I watched from the living room as her car disappeared down the wet street. Then I sat quietly with my tea. The clock ticked softly, minutes passed, then an hour. Around 10:30 the mail truck finally stopped in front of the house. The young mailman stepped out and slid a handful of envelopes into our mailbox. Then he drove away. I sat there staring at that mailbox. A simple metal box at the end of the driveway, but suddenly it felt like the center of a mystery. I told myself not to do it, it wasn't my business. Maeve would check it soon enough. Still, my feet carried me outside. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle. The pavement smelled fresh and cold. I walked down the driveway slowly. Every step felt strangely loud. The mailbox creaked when I opened it. Inside were 4 envelopes. Electric bill, advertisement, local grocery coupon, and one thick white envelope, no return address, just Maeve's name written across the front, in neat, careful handwriting. My fingers hovered over it. For a moment I simply stared. Then I closed the mailbox, left the envelope inside, and walked back to the house, because opening someone else's mail crosses a line, even when curiosity burns, even when suspicion whispers. But as I stood in the kitchen again, drying my hands with a towel, a strange uneasiness settled in my chest. Not guilt, something else. A feeling I couldn't quite name. Something was coming, I could feel it. And somehow that envelope was part of it. Maeve returned around noon. The moment she stepped out of the car, she looked straight at the mailbox. Not at the house, not at the street, the mailbox. Her walk quickened slightly. She opened it, pulled out the envelopes. And when she saw the thick white one, she froze. Just for a second, then she looked around the street quickly. The same way she had that morning with the burnt toast. Checking, watching, making sure no one was paying attention. But I was. From the kitchen window, her fingers trembled as she slid the envelope into her purse. Then she walked inside, trying to look calm, trying to look ordinary, but something had changed. I could see it in her eyes, something big, something heavy. And suddenly the words she had said earlier that week echoed in my mind again. Stop asking questions, the problem was. Now I had far more questions than before. That evening, as Hendrix and Maeve sat across from each other at the dinner table, the tension between them felt almost invisible. Almost, but not completely, because sometimes secrets don't speak. They simply sit in the room, waiting. That night at dinner, nothing dramatic happened. No arguments, no raised voices, just the quiet rhythm of forks against plates and the low hum of the refrigerator behind us. Yet the silence felt heavier than usual. Hendrix talked about work the way he always did. Something about a concrete delivery that arrived late and how the crew had to stay 2 extra hours to finish the foundation. Maeve nodded politely. Sounds exhausting, she said, but she didn't really look at him when she spoke. Her eyes kept drifting toward her purse. The purse she had placed on the chair beside her, the purse that held the thick white envelope. I noticed every time her fingers brushed against the strap, small movements, protective movements, the kind people make when they're guarding something important or dangerous. I tried to focus on my food. Chicken, roasted potatoes, green beans, simple things, but my mind kept circling the same question. What was inside that envelope? Hendrix didn't seem to notice anything unusual. He rarely did, not because he was careless, just focused. He had always been that way, even as a boy. When he was 8 years old, he once spent 3 straight hours building a wooden birdhouse with his father in the garage. Hammering nails, measuring boards, concentrating so deeply he didn't hear the thunderstorm rolling in outside. That same focus had followed him into adulthood. Work first, everything else second. Sometimes that kind of devotion is admirable. Other times it leaves space for things to grow quietly in the background. Things no one sees until they're already too large to ignore. After dinner, Hendrix went upstairs to answer a few work calls. Maeve gathered the dishes. "I'll help," I said. "No, that's okay." Her voice was quick, too quick again. She began washing plates with nervous energy, her hands moving faster than usual. The water splashed against the sink. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, I said gently, "You seem stressed lately." She didn't look up, just tired. From the errands, her shoulders stiffened. For a moment, the only sound in the room was running water. Then she turned the faucet off. Slowly, "Maria, I know you mean well," she said quietly, "but some things are just personal." I studied her face. There was no anger there, just tension, fear maybe. "I'm not trying to pry," I replied softly. "I just worry about this family." Her eyes flickered slightly at that word, family. Then she dried her hands with a towel and forced a small smile. "Everything's fine." The conversation ended there, or at least that's how it looked on the surface. But something inside me had already shifted. Because when someone says everything is fine, sometimes it means the exact opposite. Later that night, the house settled into its usual quiet. Hendrix fell asleep quickly. I could hear his steady footsteps above my room as he moved around before bed. Maeve stayed downstairs longer. I knew because the living room light glowed under my door. Around midnight, I stepped into the hallway for a glass of water. The light was still on. Maeve sat on the couch with her laptop open. The thick white envelope lay on the coffee table. For a moment, I considered walking into the room, asking her directly, but something in her posture stopped me. She looked fragile. Like someone standing at the edge of a difficult decision. Instead, I returned to my room. Sleep came slowly that night. The next morning, the house woke earlier than usual. I heard footsteps before sunrise, soft ones, Maeve's. Curiosity pulled me from bed. When I stepped quietly into the hallway, I saw her near the front door. She was dressed already, hair tied back, purse over her shoulder. Her movements were careful, almost secretive. "Leaving early?" I asked. She jumped slightly. "I didn't realize you were awake." "Old habits," I said. "I've been waking up before dawn for 40 years. She nodded awkwardly. "I just need to run out for something." At 5:30 in the morning, but I didn't say that. Instead, I watched as she slipped her shoes on. Then she paused. For a moment, it looked like she wanted to say something important, but the moment passed. "I'll be back later," she said, and then she was gone. The door closed softly behind her. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table. Outside, the sky slowly turned from dark blue to pale gray. The neighborhood was still quiet. No school buses, no lawn mowers, just the distant sound of a train somewhere beyond the hills. Maeve didn't return until nearly 10, 4 hours. When she stepped inside, she looked exhausted. Her hair had come loose from its tie, and there was a faint redness around her eyes, like she had been crying. "Long morning?" I asked carefully. She nodded. "Yes." That was all, no explanation, no details, just yes, but something else caught my attention. Her purse looked thinner, the envelope was gone. Over the next few days, the tension inside the house grew thicker, not openly, but quietly. Maeve spent more time on her phone, Hendrix spent more time at work, and I spent more time noticing the spaces between their conversations. The pauses, the unfinished sentences. One evening, Hendrix asked casually, "Did you pick up the dry cleaning?" Maeve blinked at him like she had forgotten what he was talking about. "Oh, I'll go tomorrow." Hendrix frowned slightly. "You said that yesterday." I know. She forced a small laugh. "I've just been busy." "Busy with what?" The question hovered silently in the room, but Hendrix didn't push. He rarely did. That was the thing about my son. He trusted easily, perhaps too easily. 3 days later, something happened that changed everything. It was late afternoon. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the living room floor. Maeve had left again that morning. Another errand, another vague explanation. I was watering the plants near the window when a car pulled slowly into our driveway, not Hendrix's truck. This was a dark gray sedan. The engine idled for a moment, then a man stepped out. He looked to be in his early 40s, tall, neatly dressed. He checked the address on his phone before walking toward the house. My heart gave a small, uneasy beat. When he knocked, I opened the door. "Hello," he said politely. "I'm looking for Maeve Carter." I hesitated. "She's not home right now." The man nodded slowly. "I see." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "My name is Baylor Harris," he said. "Could you give this to her?" I took the card. The words printed across it made my stomach tighten. Baylor Harris family law attorney family law, divorce, custody, legal separation. The meanings rushed through my mind all at once. I'll make sure she gets it, I said carefully. Thank you, he gave a polite nod and returned to his car. Within seconds he was gone, but the quiet he left behind felt heavier than anything before. I stood there in the doorway for several minutes. The business card felt strangely heavy in my hand. Family law attorney, why would Maeve need a lawyer? Why secretly? Why without Hendrix knowing? My chest tightened with a slow, uncomfortable realization. The envelope, the early mornings, the secrecy, the tension. All the small pieces began arranging themselves into a possibility I didn't want to believe. Could she be planning to leave him? The thought sat in my chest like a stone, because if that were true, then the life we had built together in this house was already beginning to crack, and Hendrix had no idea. When Maeve returned that evening, I was waiting in the living room. The card rested quietly on the coffee table. Her eyes landed on it the moment she walked in, and the color drained from her face. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. Her voice sounded different now. Thin, afraid, I met her gaze steadily. "He stopped by looking for you." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she sank slowly into the chair across from me. Her hands trembled, and for the first time since all this began. Maeve looked like someone who could no longer keep a secret inside. Maeve stared at the business card like it might disappear if she looked away long enough. Her fingers hovered over the table but didn't touch it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Finally, she picked up the card and turned it over slowly, her lips pressed together in a thin line. "I didn't expect him to come here," she said quietly. Her voice sounded tired, not defensive, just worn. I folded my hands in my lap. "Would you like to explain why a family lawyer is looking for you?" She closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them again, something inside her expression had changed. Not relief, but resignation. The look someone has when they realize the truth can't stay hidden anymore. "It's not what you think," she said softly. That sentence, those 5 words, I've lived long enough to know they usually mean the opposite. Still, I kept my voice calm. "Then help me understand." Maeve leaned back in the chair and rubbed her temples. For a moment, she looked much older than 35. "I wasn't planning to tell anyone yet, not even Hendrix." Her silence answered the question. A heavy quiet settled between us. I could hear the old clock ticking in the hallway. Tick, 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 time passing, truth waiting. Finally, Maeve spoke again. "I want to see him about a legal document." "What kind of document?" Her eyes flickered toward the stairs, as if she were checking whether Hendrix might suddenly appear. Then she lowered her voice. "A will." The word surprised me. A will. She nodded. "Yes." I studied her face carefully. People lie in many ways, but the eyes rarely cooperate. And right now, Maeve's eyes held something very real, fear. "Why would you need a will?" I asked. She hesitated again, and then the truth finally slipped out. "Because I might not be here much longer." The words hung in the air like cold mist. "What do you mean by that?" I asked slowly. Her fingers tightened around the card. For a moment, she seemed to be fighting something inside herself, then she said it. "I'm sick, Maria." The room felt suddenly smaller. "Sick how?" She swallowed. "Cancer." The word landed quietly, but its weight filled the entire room. I didn't speak, I couldn't. She continued, her voice almost mechanical. "I found out 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks, all those errands. All those early mornings, all those secrets. Breast cancer," she said. "Stage 3, my chest tightened. Stage 3, serious, aggressive, life-changing." "Why didn't you tell Hendrix?" I asked gently, her eyes filled with tears immediately. "Because I know him." That answer came without hesitation. "He would drop everything," she continued. "Quit jobs, cancel projects, sit beside me every day worrying." She wiped a tear quickly. "And that's the last thing he needs right now." I felt a quiet frustration rising inside me. "That's his wife, Maeve, I know." Her voice cracked. "That's exactly why I didn't tell him yet." She looked down at the floor. "I needed to understand everything first." "Understand what?" "The treatment, the costs, the odds." She let out a small, shaky breath. "And whether there was even a future to plan for." The lawyer, the envelope, the secrecy, suddenly every piece made a painful kind of sense. "You're preparing a will," I said slowly. "Yes." Her voice was barely a whisper now, and a few other things. "Like what?" She hesitated, then she said something that made my heart sink even deeper. "Divorce papers." For a moment I wondered if I had heard her correctly. "Divorce?" "Yes." The word sounded wrong in the quiet living room. You're sick and your solution is to leave him. Her eyes met mine, filled with tears. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. She wiped her face with trembling hands. If things get worse, Hendrix could spend years taking care of me. I felt my chest tighten. That's marriage. No, she said firmly. That's sacrifice. She shook her head slowly. I won't do that to him. You think leaving him will hurt less? I think it will free him. The conviction in her voice stunned me. This isn't love, I said quietly. It's fear. Her expression hardened slightly. You don't know what it's like to hear a doctor say the word terminal. The room went silent. Terminal, the word lingered in the air like a storm cloud. Did the doctor say that? I asked carefully. She looked away. Not exactly. Then why are you acting like you're already gone? Her shoulders sagged. Because the odds aren't good. I leaned forward slightly. Maeve, people fight things like this every day. I know, but I'm not afraid of dying. Her voice softened. I'm afraid of watching Hendrix suffer through it. She stared at the floor again. I've seen what long illnesses do to families. Her voice became distant. My mother died slowly. My father aged 10 years in 12 months. A long pause followed. I won't let that happen to him. For several seconds I didn't speak. Then I said the one thing that had been forming in my mind since she started talking. You're making a decision for him. Her eyes flicked up. I'm protecting him. No. My voice remained calm, but firm. You're deciding what he's strong enough to handle. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again because somewhere deep down she knew I was right. The front door opened suddenly. Both of us turned. Hendrix stepped inside carrying his tool bag. Hey, he said cheerfully. Traffic was a miracle today. Then he looked at our faces. The smile faded. What's going on? Maeve stood quickly. Nothing. Too quickly, Hendrix frowned. You both look like someone died. The irony of that sentence tightened something inside my chest. Maeve grabbed her purse. I need some air, she said, and before either of us could stop her, she walked out the door. Hendrix stared after her, confused. Then he looked at me. Mom, I hesitated. Because in that moment, I held a truth that could change my son's entire world. And Maeve had asked me not to tell him, but secrets have a way of burning inside a house, and this one was already starting to scorch the walls. Hendrix rubbed the back of his neck. What's going on with her lately? I chose my words carefully. She's dealing with something difficult. His eyes narrowed slightly. What kind of difficult? I hesitated again, then said the only honest thing I could without betraying her trust completely. Something she's afraid to talk about. Hendrix stared at the door for a long moment, then he said quietly, she's been different. I nodded. Yes. His voice lowered. You think she's unhappy with me? The vulnerability in that question broke my heart a little. Because Hendrix had no idea how far from the truth that was. No, I said softly, I don't think that's the problem. He sighed, I just wish she would talk to me. Outside, I heard Maeve's car start. The engine faded down the street. And as I sat there watching my son stand in the living room, confused and worried, one painful realization settled heavily in my mind. Maeve believed she was protecting him. But secrets like this rarely protect anyone. Eventually, the truth always finds its way into the light. And when it does, someone always gets hurt. After Maeve drove away that evening, the house felt hollow. Hendrix stood in the living room for a long moment, staring at the door like he expected her to walk back through it and explain everything. But the quiet stayed. Finally, he turned to me. Did I do something wrong? The question was so simple, so sincere, and it broke something small inside my chest. No, I said gently, you didn't. He ran a hand through his hair and sat down heavily on the couch. She's been distant. I nodded slowly. I've noticed. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I asked her last week if everything was okay, and she said yes. His voice carried the quiet frustration of someone who wanted to believe what he was told but couldn't quite convince himself. I thought maybe work stress or something with her sister. He shook his head. But it feels like she's somewhere else lately. I understood that feeling. When a secret lives in a house, everyone can feel its shadow, even if they don't know what it is yet. Hendrix sighed and stood up again. I'm going to drive around and find her. The instinct was immediate, protective. That was Hendrix, always trying to fix things. Give her a little space tonight, I said carefully. He looked at me. You think that's better? For now. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. Okay. But I could see the worry sitting behind his eyes, and I knew it would only grow. Maeve didn't return until almost midnight. I heard the front door open softly while I sat awake in the living room. The light from the lamp cast a small circle across the floor. She froze when she saw me. "You're still up?" "Yes." Her shoulders sagged slightly. I didn't mean to worry anyone. Hendrix had already gone to bed an hour earlier, though I doubted he was sleeping much. I gestured toward the couch. "Sit for a moment." She hesitated, then slowly lowered herself onto the opposite chair. For a few seconds we simply listened to the quiet house. Finally I spoke. "You can't carry this alone." Her eyes filled with tired frustration. "You think I want to? No, then why does everyone keep telling me what I should do?" My voice remained calm. "Because we care about you." She rubbed her temples. "You care about Hendrix. That too." Silence stretched between us, then she whispered something that surprised me. "I'm terrified. Not dramatic, not loud, just honest." "What scares you the most?" I asked softly. She stared at the floor. "That if I tell him, I'll see that look on his face." "What look?" "The moment his whole world changes." Her voice trembled slightly. "I don't want to be the reason his life falls apart." I leaned forward gently. "Maeve, you're not a storm that ruined his life. You don't know that yet. You're his wife." "That's exactly the problem." Her eyes lifted to meet mine. "If I leave now before treatment starts, before everything gets worse, he can move on." The logic hurt to hear because it sounded so carefully planned. "So the divorce papers are part of that plan?" "Yes. And you think he'll simply accept that?" "I'll make him believe I stopped loving him." The words landed like a stone in the room. "You'd lie about something like that?" "If it saves him years of pain, yes." For a long moment I didn't speak, because I was seeing something clearly now. Maeve wasn't running away, she was trying to sacrifice herself, and sometimes sacrifice can look a lot like destruction. "Maeve," I said quietly, "do you know what Hendrix did after his father died?" She looked confused. "No, he stayed awake for 3 nights. Her eyes widened slightly. "Why?" "Because he was afraid I might stop breathing in my sleep." She blinked slowly. He was 22 years old, a grown man, but grief made him feel like a frightened boy again. I paused, and he still chose to stay. The room fell silent. "You're trying to protect him from pain," I continued, "but love doesn't work that way." Her voice cracked. "Then what should I do?" "Tell him the truth." She shook her head immediately. "I can't." "Yes, you can." "No." Her voice became firm. "I've already decided." And that was the moment I realized something. Maeve had built an entire plan in her mind. Appointments, legal documents, an exit strategy. She had convinced herself that leaving was the kindest choice. But the problem with carefully built plans is that they rarely survive contact with reality. The next morning proved that. Hendrix woke earlier than usual. I could hear him pacing upstairs before coming down into the kitchen. Maeve sat at the table drinking coffee. The air between them felt tense. "Did you go somewhere last night?" Hendrix asked. "Yes." "Where?" "Just driving." He frowned. "For 4 hours," she shrugged. I needed to think. He studied her face. "About what?" "Life." The vagueness irritated him, I could see it. "Maeve," he said carefully, "are you unhappy?" Her eyes softened for a moment. "No." "Then what's going on?" She looked down at her coffee cup. "Nothing." That word again, nothing. Hendrix leaned back in his chair. "You've been disappearing every morning for weeks." Silence. "You're talking to lawyers." Maeve froze, her eyes flicked toward me. Hendrix noticed the glance immediately. "What lawyers?" He asked slowly. The room went still. I hadn't told him, but somehow he knew something wasn't right. Maeve's hands began trembling slightly. "You went through my things?" she asked. "No." His voice hardened. "But someone showed up here yesterday." Now her face went pale. "You met him?" Hendrix nodded. "He came by my job site this morning." My heart skipped. "What did he want?" Maeve asked. "To confirm my name." Her breathing became shallow. And ask if I was aware my wife was filing legal documents." The room filled with silence, heavy, unavoidable. Hendrix's voice dropped. "Maeve, are you divorcing me?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally whispered, "Yes." The word shattered the morning. Hendrix stared at her like he didn't recognize the person sitting across the table. "Why?" She looked away. "I just don't feel the same anymore." Even I felt the sting of that lie. Hendrix's face tightened. "Since when?" "A while." His voice became rough. "You've been lying to me this whole time." She didn't answer because technically yes. But not in the way he believed. Hendrix stood suddenly. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. "If you want to leave, Maeve, just say it." "I did." "No." His voice cracked. You said you stopped loving me." The pain in that sentence filled the room. "But you didn't say why." She kept her eyes down. "I told you, that's not an explanation." He looked at me briefly, then back at her. "What happened?" Maeve whispered something so quiet it barely reached my ears. "Nothing happened." Hendricks laughed bitterly. "Exactly." Then he walked out the front door. The slam echoed through the house. Maeve sat there frozen. Her shoulders began shaking silently, and I realized something important in that moment. Her plan had already started falling apart. Because lies might protect someone for a while, but they also create wounds that truth never intended. The front door slammed so hard the picture frames on the hallway wall rattled. Then the house went quiet again. Maeve sat at the kitchen table with her hands covering her face. Her shoulders trembled, but no sound came out. The kind of crying that stays trapped inside a person. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle. Then I poured 2 cups of tea. It's strange what people do during emotional storms. Sometimes simple routines are the only way to keep your hands steady. I placed a cup in front of her. She didn't look up. "He hates me now," she whispered. "No," my voice stayed calm. "He's hurt." "That's the same thing." "No," I said softly, "it is." She finally lowered her hands. Her eyes were red. He looked at me like I was a stranger. "Because right now you are." She flinched slightly, but she didn't argue, because deep down she knew it was true. "You're asking him to believe something that isn't real," I continued. "And Hendricks has never been very good at understanding lies." Maeve stared at the steam rising from her tea. "I thought it would be easier this way." "For who?" "For him." I shook my head gently. "Pain doesn't disappear just because you hide the reason behind it." Her lips trembled. "But if he thinks I stopped loving him, eventually he'll move on." I watched her carefully. "You really believe that?" "Yes." "Maeve," I said quietly, "my son once drove 3 hours in a snowstorm because you had a fever and refused to go to the doctor." Her eyes flickered. "He loves you more than his own comfort." A tear slid slowly down her cheek. "That's why I have to do this?" "No," I said, "that's exactly why you shouldn't." But she had already closed herself off again. Her plan was still standing, even if the ground beneath it had started shaking. Hendricks didn't come home that evening. Around 7 o'clock, I received a short text message. "Staying at Mark's tonight." Mark was his closest friend. They had worked construction together for nearly 15 years. I showed the message to Maeve. She stared at the phone for a long moment before whispering, "That's probably for the best." But her voice sounded hollow. The house felt larger that night, emptier, 2 people sitting under the same roof with a secret neither could escape. The next morning, the quiet tension spread beyond our house. News travels faster than people expect, especially in small neighborhoods. Around 10 o'clock, our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, stopped by with a container of homemade soup. She had lived on this street for 30 years and believed every problem could be softened with warm food. "I heard Hendricks's truck leave late yesterday," she said casually as she stepped inside. Her eyes moved between Maeve and me. "Everything all right?" Maeve forced a polite smile. "Just a busy week." Mrs. Caldwell studied her face carefully. Old neighbors develop a talent for noticing things. "Well," she said slowly, "if you need anything, you know where I am." Then she left, but I could see the concern lingering in her expression. Maeve sat down heavily after the door closed. "It's starting," she murmured. "What is?" "People asking questions." And she was right, because secrets rarely stay confined to one house. They ripple outward through friends, through family, through quiet conversations over fences. That afternoon, Hendricks finally came home. His truck pulled into the driveway slowly. The engine idled for a few seconds before he turned it off. I watched from the living room window. He looked exhausted, like someone who had barely slept. When he stepped inside, the tension in the air thickened immediately. Maeve stood near the kitchen counter. Neither of them spoke at first. Finally, Hendricks said, "So this is really happening?" Maeve nodded faintly. "Yes." His voice stayed calm, but there was a heaviness beneath it. "How long have you been planning it?" She hesitated. "A few weeks." He exhaled slowly. While we were still eating dinner together, watching movies, talking about vacations, her silence answered him. Hendricks ran a hand across his face. "You could have just told me you were unhappy." "It's not that simple." "Then explain it to me." "I can't." His frustration finally surfaced. "Why not?" "Because," she stopped herself, because the truth was sitting right behind those words, waiting, but she refused to let it out. Hendricks stared at her. You know what hurts the most? What? That you think I'm too weak to handle whatever the real reason is. Her head snapped up. That's not true, then prove it. The challenge hung between them. Maeve's lips trembled, but the words never came. Finally, Hendricks looked away. I'll talk to the lawyer tomorrow, he said quietly. Maeve blinked. What? If this is what you want, I won't fight it. The calmness in his voice made the moment even more painful. You deserve someone who loves you properly, he added. She whispered. I do love you, not enough. He walked past her toward the stairs, then stopped halfway up. Just tell me one thing, she waited. Was there someone else? Her eyes widened. No, then I really don't understand. He shook his head slowly. 10 years together and suddenly you're gone. The sadness in his voice filled the entire house. Then he disappeared upstairs. Maeve stood frozen in the kitchen. The lie had done its work. It had wounded exactly the person she was trying to protect. 2 days later, the situation became even more complicated. Hendrix's sister, Laura, arrived unexpectedly. Laura had always been protective of her younger brother, sharp-minded, direct, and not particularly patient with emotional puzzles. She walked into the living room and placed her purse on the couch. All right, she said bluntly. Someone explain what's going on. Maeve looked like she wanted to disappear. Hendrix rubbed his forehead. It's between us. Laura crossed her arms. No, her gaze shifted to Maeve. You're divorcing my brother without warning. That's personal, so is family. Her voice softened slightly, but the firmness remained. Did he do something? Maeve shook her head. No, then why are you leaving him? The question hovered in the room like a spotlight. Maeve stared at the floor. I just don't feel the same. Laura let out a small, disbelieving laugh. You expect me to buy that? Hendrix sighed. Laura, no, she said, holding up a hand. I want to hear the truth. Maeve's breathing became shallow because the truth was pressing harder now, from every direction, family, neighbors, Hendrix himself. The lie was becoming harder to carry, and I could see it in her eyes. She was reaching the edge, the point where silence becomes unbearable. But the question remained. Would she finally tell them the truth, or would she continue letting the lie destroy everything first? Laura's question hung in the air like a weight no one could move. Why are you leaving him? Maeve kept her eyes on the floor. The room had gone so quiet that even the clock on the wall sounded louder than usual. Tick, tick, tick. Hendrix stood near the window with his arms folded, staring outside at the driveway. He looked tired, not angry, just tired in the way people look when something inside them has quietly broken. Maeve, Laura said again, her voice softer this time, I'm not trying to attack you. But you can't expect us to accept a divorce with no explanation. Maeve swallowed. I told you, Laura shook her head slowly. No, you gave us a sentence. She leaned forward slightly. That's not the same thing as the truth. Maeve's fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. I could see the battle happening inside her. The lie had protected her plans so far, but it was destroying the people she loved. And now the entire family was standing in front of her, waiting. Finally, she looked at Hendrix. Really looked at him. His shoulders were slightly slumped. The quiet confidence he usually carried had disappeared. In its place was uncertainty, pain, and confusion. That was the moment the lie finally cracked. I'm sick, she whispered. The words were so soft that for a second no one moved. Hendrix turned slowly. What did you say? Her eyes filled with tears. I'm sick. The room felt like it stopped breathing. Laura frowned. Sick how? Maeve took a shaky breath. Cancer. Hendrix didn't react immediately. Sometimes the mind needs a moment to understand something that big. What kind? He asked quietly. Breast cancer. His face went pale. Since when? 6 weeks ago. Laura's eyes widened. 6 weeks, Maeve nodded. I've been seeing doctors, getting tests. Hendrix stared at her like he was trying to recognize the person in front of him again. You've known for 6 weeks. Yes. And you didn't tell me. The hurt in that sentence felt sharper than anger. Maeve wiped her face. I didn't want to destroy your life. Hendrix blinked. What? The treatments could take years, she continued. Chemotherapy, surgeries, hospital stays. Her voice trembled. I didn't want you trapped in that. Hendrix let out a quiet, disbelieving breath. So your solution was to divorce me? Yes. Laura stared at her like she had just heard the most confusing logic in the world. You thought abandoning my brother would make his life better? Maeve shook her head desperately. I wasn't abandoning him, I was freeing him. Hendrix laughed, but there was no humor in it. Freeing me? His voice grew stronger now. You think loving you is some kind of prison? Maeve flinched. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Tears streamed down her cheeks now. I meant I didn't want to watch you suffer while I got worse. The room fell silent again because behind her words was a fear every human understands. The fear of becoming someone else's burden. Hendrix walked slowly across the room. He stopped a few feet in front of her. You remember our wedding day? He asked quietly. Maeve nodded through her tears. Yes, what did we promise each other? She hesitated, then whispered, in sickness and in health. Hendrix's voice softened. That wasn't just pretty language, Maeve. He knelt down so he was looking directly into her eyes. That was the point. Her shoulders shook. I thought I was protecting you. You were deciding for me. I didn't want you to feel obligated. I wanted to be obligated. His words landed gently but firmly, because that's what love does. The room stayed quiet as Maeve cried. Laura stood off to the side, arms folded, but even her expression had softened. Finally, Hendrix reached forward and took Maeve's hands. You should have told me. I know, we could have faced this together. I was scared. He nodded slowly. I'm scared now too. That honesty hung in the room like something fragile. Then he said something that made Maeve cry even harder. But I'd rather be scared with you than confused without you. The following days were not magically easier. Truth rarely fixes everything overnight, but it changes the direction of things. Hendrix canceled several projects at work so he could attend Maeve's appointments. Laura began researching treatment centers. And for the first time since the diagnosis, Maeve stopped carrying the weight alone. I watched the change quietly from the edges of those moments. The house felt different again, still heavy, but honest. One afternoon, about a week later, Maeve and I sat together on the back porch. The late afternoon sun warmed the wooden boards beneath our chairs. She held a mug of tea in both hands. I almost destroyed everything, she said softly. You were afraid, I replied. That's not an excuse. No, I agreed, but it's human. She stared out at the garden. I really thought leaving would be the kindest thing. I nodded. Sometimes people believe sacrifice is the same thing as love. She looked at me. Isn't it? Not when it erases the other person's choice. She considered that quietly, then a small smile appeared. Hendrix hasn't stopped hovering since I told him. I chuckled. That sounds like him. Yesterday he tried to cook dinner. Oh dear, she laughed softly. Exactly. For the first time in weeks, the sound of her laughter felt natural, not forced, not fragile, just real. A few days later, Hendrix walked into the living room holding the divorce papers. He set them down on the table in front of Maeve. Do you still want these? She shook her head immediately. No. He picked them up, looked at them for a second. Then tore them slowly in half, and again, and again. The pieces fell into the trash can. Laura clapped quietly from the doorway. Well, she said with a small smile, that's one problem solved. Hendrix wrapped an arm around Maeve's shoulders. We've got bigger ones to deal with. Maeve leaned into him, but this time she wasn't trying to push him away. Of course, the road ahead was still uncertain. Cancer doesn't disappear just because love is strong. Treatments would begin soon. There would be difficult days, hard conversations, moments of fear. But the difference now was simple. No one was facing it alone anymore. And sometimes that's the most powerful change a truth can bring. Life didn't suddenly become easy after that day. Stories sometimes end neatly once the truth comes out, but real life doesn't work that way. The truth simply changes what kind of road you're walking on. Maeve's treatments began 3 weeks later. The first chemotherapy appointment happened on a quiet Tuesday morning. Hendrix insisted on driving her. Of course he did. I watched them from the front porch as they prepared to leave. Maeve wore a soft gray sweater and a scarf even though the weather was warm. She looked smaller somehow, not weaker, just more aware of the battle ahead. Hendrix opened the car door for her like he always did. But this time there was something different in the way he moved. Careful, protective, like every gesture mattered more now. Before they left, Maeve turned toward me. Her eyes held that same mixture of fear and determination I had seen in the living room when she finally told the truth. Will you keep the house warm for us? She asked with a small smile. I nodded. Always. Then they drove away. The car disappeared at the end of the street just like it had so many mornings before, but now there were no secrets hiding behind the trip. Just honesty and courage. The months that followed tested all of us. Chemotherapy is not gentle. Some days Maeve came home exhausted, barely able to climb the stairs. Other days she sat quietly at the kitchen table, sipping soup while Hendrix hovered nearby, pretending not to worry. Her hair began to fall out after the second treatment. I remember the morning she stood in front of the bathroom mirror holding a small brush filled with dark strands. For a moment she simply stared at it, then Hendrix stepped behind her. Without saying a word, he picked up the electric clippers from the drawer. "Let's not drag this part out," he said softly. She looked at him through the mirror. "You don't have to do that." "I know," but he turned the clippers on anyway. The soft buzzing sound filled the bathroom, and slowly, carefully, he shaved the rest of her hair away. When he finished, he kissed the top of her head. "You're still the most beautiful woman in this house," he said. Maeve laughed through her tears. And I stood quietly in the doorway pretending not to cry. The house itself changed during those months too, not physically, but emotionally. Neighbors began dropping off meals. Laura visited almost every weekend. Hendrix started working fewer hours. The living room became a place for long conversations. Sometimes about treatment plans, sometimes about completely ordinary things like movies or recipes. Because even when life becomes serious, people still need moments that feel normal. Maeve began keeping a small notebook. She wrote in it every evening. One night I asked what she was writing. "Things I don't want to forget," she said. "Like what?" She flipped through the pages, little moments. She pointed to one line. "Hendrix tried to make pancakes today, burned 3 of them before getting one right." She smiled softly. "I used to think big events were the most important parts of life. And now I think it's the small ones." About 8 months after her diagnosis, Maeve received news that none of us had dared to expect. The treatments were working. The tumor had shrunk significantly. The doctors used words like remission, careful words, hopeful words, but words that carried light. That night Hendrix cooked dinner again, and this time the pancakes actually turned out perfectly. We sat around the kitchen table laughing in a way that felt almost unfamiliar after so many difficult months. Maeve reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You were right," she said quietly. "About what?" "About telling the truth." I smiled gently. "Truth doesn't make pain disappear, but it makes it easier to carry." "Yes," she said softly, "that's exactly it. Sometimes late in the evenings I think back to that morning in the kitchen, the burnt toast, the quiet sentence, 'Stop asking questions.' At the time, it felt like a wall had been built between us. But now I understand something different. Maeve wasn't trying to shut me out. She was trying to protect everyone. The problem is, love doesn't need protection from truth. It needs honesty to survive. Secrets may seem like shields, but more often they become knives. They cut the people we're trying to save. These days, Maeve still has checkups every few months. The road isn't completely finished yet, but the house feels peaceful again. Hendrix hums quietly while he cooks. Maeve's hair has started growing back in soft, dark curls, and sometimes in the evenings we sit together on the porch watching the sun disappear behind the trees. Simple moments, the kind that used to feel ordinary, now they feel precious. I've told you this story because I learned something important through all of it. When people face fear, their first instinct is often to hide, to protect the ones they love, to carry the burden alone. But love doesn't ask for perfection, it asks for presence, for honesty, for the courage to let someone stand beside you when the road becomes difficult. Maeve thought leaving would save Hendrix from pain. Instead, the truth gave them the strength to face it together. And sometimes that's the real miracle, not that life becomes easy, but that we realize we were never meant to carry it alone. So now I'll ask you something. If you were in Maeve's place, would you have done the same thing? Would you have kept the secret to protect the person you love? Or would you have trusted them with the truth from the beginning? Life gives us these difficult choices sometimes, and there isn't always a perfect answer, but I would truly love to hear what you think. If this story touched you in some way, share your thoughts below. And if you enjoy stories about family, resilience, and the complicated ways love shows itself, stay with us. There are many more stories waiting to be told.